a great panel. We are talking today about charter schools, the next generation unbundled. And this is a perfect time to talk about it. And we have the perfect group of people to talk about it because we are experiencing a moment in time with the public, with families, with students, with schools, where we need to think about things differently. We need to know what we have in our arsenal. What do reformers have in their arsenal to meet the challenges of this moment, the way that charter schools were intended to meet the challenges that families and students were facing in public education. Today, we have Jonathan Johnson, who is the founder and CEO of Rooted Schools. We have Robert Ruiz, who is the executive director of Choice Matters. And we have Rachelle Gibson, who is enrollment director at Prenda. And I can't think of a better group of people to open up this question to about how are you earning your keep as people who believe in charters and believe that charter schools have something unique to offer the field of education. And this is the moment where it matters a lot because families are experiencing lots of trouble. I would love to open up with the question with each of you. How are you making sense of the moment? And how are you making sense of what it is that you offer to the field in terms of meeting the moment? And why don't we start with you, Robert? It'd be interesting to hear your unique perspective on exactly that. How are you meeting the moment with what you offer?
Well, that's a big question. You know, I think that we are, I say we because it's not just me, it's a whole group of people that are doing the work here in Oklahoma. But we're trying to deliver on the promise of charter schools. Because, you know, we made a promise a long time ago that if we were given the permission to operate independently, to have more flexibility in exchange for increased accountability, that we would deliver on a promise that we could do it better. You know, we could create models that served students better in certain communities or with certain situations. And I think that's what we're doing here in Oklahoma. I think the way we designed the education model that we are currently implementing, we are delivering on that promise that I think all charter schools have at the base of their foundation.
Rachelle, you all are doing something really very different at Prenda, and I wonder how it's holding up in a time like this, because, you know, sometimes when you do something so different, it's hard enough to do it well in regular times. But how's it meeting the moment now?
That's a great question. It's actually, I feel like we've stepped into it even more, you know, early on. So we have micro schools, 5 to 10 students in an informal setting, oftentimes homes. And before COVID hit, having your kids do school at home was really weird. And then all of a sudden the entire country had their kids at home for school, and having these small groups engaging in academics in a really powerful way just became like, we went from being sort of early adopters to a mainstream option for people who wanted that combination of an in-person environment that was safe for their kids.
You know, when COVID first hit, I think people were in crisis mode, and then there was a little bit of crisis teaching at home, and then districts were scrambling to do their thing, whatever that, you know, that they could offer. And then we saw parents starting to come together to create their own solutions, but that wasn't always reaching some of the families that needed the help the most. I mean, some of the families where we believe that charters hold the most promise for, marginalized families economically, racially, socially. Do you feel like with Prenda, you all have been able to close some of the gap for the families that need a lot of help?
Yeah, absolutely. The foundation of our model is to find schools to partner with, whether they be charter or district, and so that Prenda is free to all kids. That's really, really important to us. And I think it sort of sets us apart from a lot of people that have potted up, you know, because that accessibility matters a lot to us, and it's really important to our model.
So Jonathan, from your view, I mean, you're in kind of like, I'm in Minnesota, the birthplace of charter schools, and I should have said this at the very beginning. You guys are all welcome for our contribution to the field. But one of the things about, you know, we have Minnesota, we have a fairly mature charter school market, lots of mom and pop shops that are doing different things. You know, we are definitely the let a thousand flower bloom state here, but you're in a kind of a mature charter school market also. What are you seeing in terms of what your colleagues are doing in other schools and what you're able to do, in a more mature market for families that maybe we wouldn't be able to do maybe in more traditional districts?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Chris. I'm not sure if this is something that is unique to New Orleans, but what I see as having the opportunity to do now in a way that maybe other communities can't is create a faster path to upward mobility for all. And the way we believe we can go about doing this the fastest is by leveraging our country's young people, our community's young people, to meet growing talent needs in communities. What we're experiencing in New Orleans, and this is also true, we have our second school in Indianapolis. Over the next decade, at least this was pre-COVID times, they were projecting thousands, tens of thousands of jobs, entry-level jobs opening that didn't have enough homegrown talent to meet what was projected. And so we just have a unique opportunity in this moment to leverage our young people in ways that we may not have ever imagined to create near and longer term economic sustainability in our communities.
So how would you do that? What's an example of a way in which you're leveraging the young people?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, we have two pilots going on at the same time this school year. One we call the Green Balloon Fellowship, which is a year-long guaranteed placement within an entry-level job at a local tech company. And so a high school senior, at the same time they're applying for colleges, can also apply for this, what we believe to be equally viable life option, and immediately start earning a living wage salary with no debt after high school. And so that's happening right now. And we have the ability through our structures and the flexibility we have in New Orleans and Louisiana to do that. Another way that we are meeting young people and families in this moment is over the next year, we're partnering with University of Pennsylvania and 4.0 schools on a youth cash transfer study. And from what we've learned, it's the first study of its kind that gives unconditional cash transfers to young people. We're giving them $50 every week over the next 52 weeks. And so we're just curious about what's the impact of that, not only on a student's academic performance, but on other quality of life and socially emotional health indicators. And so, again, another structure that, again, I don't know how replicable or scalable some of these things might be, but are just exciting possibilities to be able to explore in my hometown community in New Orleans.
I have some kids that I want to enroll right away. You've just sold me. That was a great
under-enrolled, so we could use that, Chris.
That'd be a great pitch. That type of creative thinking, do you guys feel like this is a good environment that you're able to do it? I mean, when I said crisis parenting and crisis teaching right now, things are upside down for families right now, and offering them things that they're not used to seems like a big pitch. Are you finding it easier or harder to work with parents to get them to see that things can be done differently? And I'll open that up to anyone.
I was just going to say, from our point of view, I think it's easier because the disruption has already happened. So groups of parents that would have never considered anything other than their local public school are all of a sudden open to exploring new things. And I really think it broke everything open not for everyone, but for a lot of people.
Same here. I've been involved in a lot of school startups, and the overwhelming interest in the new model that we launched basically over the summer because of COVID was overwhelming. I mean, we filled up all of our slots almost immediately. We opened in June for enrollment, and by the end of the month, we already had 172 students. And so just amazing. But the parents are seeing the need. They're able to now take in a lot more information than they would have previously regarding what these environments look like, because now they're kind of on that wavelength of thinking about, okay, what's the best, safest place where my child is going to really thrive, and now making those kinds of decisions where I think that in the most case, you know, a lot of us have been kind of in cruise control mode on where as far as education goes. Even those that are being you know, highly underserved. So I think it's changed the conversation.
Did you guys benefit from existing relationships that you already had from pre-COVID? I mean, you know, one of the raps on charter schools is that oftentimes some versions of them want to educate kids in spite of the parents. So they didn't put an awful lot of investment into engagement and into having strong relationships with communities. And then you have something like COVID hit. I mean, is that a fair critique that maybe it was easier for some charters versus others because some had relationship as part of a core part of what they do?
I think that's fair. You know, the way we designed our school, it was completely on its head. We didn't design from the top down. There wasn't a school leader identified that wanted to put their vision into place and do something for a community. This came from parents in the community where they designed the schools. So it was completely on its head as far as parent engagement. I mean, we don't even talk about parent engagement because it's the default position. So.
And I would say the same for us. Sorry, Chris. I would say the same for us in that our micro schools, especially in COVID, have been really hyper localized, where parents are looking at what the options are. This is specifically in Arizona, and then a small expansion into Colorado, and they get together collectively and they're like, we need a solution. And so one mom gets designated as the guide, which is what we call our teachers. And they know the people that are coming to their micro school. So it's so very grassroots, ground up in the growth of that.
You probably find that because of the size also, what's called micro.
Right.
That it's
so
probably
5 to 10 students. Yeah, definitely.
5 to 10. So relationship has to be pretty important part of your model. What's the experience like? You know, you got parents who've been used to doing something very different before COVID, and then you offer them something like a micro school. Sounds good in theory on paper, but I'm a parent. I can tell you right now, a lot of things sounded good to us until we got into the middle of this. So what are you finding the experiences and the feedback, good, bad, and otherwise?
For the most part, so we did a survey about a month ago, and 2,000 of our parents responded, and we give them 5 emojis to choose from, and 95% said happy or very happy. So in COVID time, like that felt, and again, it's a lot of them came in, I think, joined Prenda as sort of a Band-Aid for COVID. The foundation of what we do is learner autonomy, and they saw what was happening with their students. They saw and now it's no longer a Band-Aid. It's kind of like they see not only what it's done for their students, but how it's affected them as a parent. Once parents have kids in Prenda, it starts to change how you parent, because the students have this control, a certain amount of control in their experience, and they do really incredible things with it. I mean, Jonathan and I have talked about this and what happens when you give kids some power, and it's incredible to see.
I mean, same question to you, Jonathan. I mean, you know, I was asking about what are the parents experiencing, but what are students experiencing right now when you give them some freedom, or you make them more a part of the model?
Yeah, no, that's an exciting question that we're still learning. I think what I hear from I'm thinking about our founding class right now who graduates this year. And what I'm hearing most from them is just staying the course, right? They signed up for a really ambitious promise 4 years ago and are hell bent on making sure that promise is delivered. Mm-hmm. And so we are just personally seeing our young people rise to the occasion. One example, we have a third of our founding class who will be getting hired by local tech companies by spring of 2021. And these are companies who have just kind of like never sort of pre-engaged with high schools before, just like kind of not what they do, but we're willing to take a chance because of the degree to which these young people have shown their resilience and ability to be sort of buoyant and bounce back from these setbacks. So So that's what we're seeing, and just hope that this is something that can continue to uplift over the next year.
You know, what's so interesting about listening to you all speak about the various offerings that you have from your different schools is just that, number one, this is the promise of charter schools. This is what charter schools were supposed to be able. I mean, if what you do doesn't solve problems, I don't know why you exist, right? So our families are having economic insecurity right now. Our students are being kept out of high wage, high growth occupations. The pipelines of getting our kids and our families into the American economic mainstream is not something schools normally would concern themselves with, right? It takes kind of like an edupreneur. Is that a new word? Did I just create one? I don't know. To really think through like solving a problem. And then also even for you, Rachel, I mean, like parents have have complained about class size forever, for instance. And we know smaller schools are more intimate for kids. Do you guys feel like some of this honestly shouldn't be rocket science? Like the larger system honestly should already be thinking some of this through?
Yes, absolutely. You know, especially in terms, you know, in our community where we were kind of really failing our ELL students. Some of the things just seem so common sense that it just we couldn't fathom how it wasn't happening before. Just to give you an example, you know, kids will come into our community sometimes for the first time into this country, and they already have a native language, which in most cases is Spanish in our case. And for some reason, at that point when they come in, all of their learning stops, and they get put into an ELL program. Probably 1 hour a day they're pulled out of class to catch up on English language skills, while the rest of the day they're sitting in classes that they have no idea what's going on. They can't interact, they can't answer. So while they're trying to catch up on English language skills, which is not always going well, they're falling behind on everything else. You know, math is the same in Spanish as it is in English. Science is the same in Spanish as it is in English. There is absolutely no reason why these children were not continuing their education, including in reinforcing their native language while they're catching up on English language skills. And so we were losing all these opportunities to have biliterate students who would more than not drop out of high school or drop out of school and be illiterate in two languages. So, I mean, it was a huge failure, but things were going on that just didn't make any sense. So that's, you know, that's kind of where we started. So,
Jonathan, you know, along the same lines, is there anything that you are doing with this kind of groundbreaking work that you're doing that you feel like the charter model is uniquely suited to helping you be able to think this broadly, be this creative?
Yeah, the closest thing I can think of, Chris, is we happen to have the privilege and the opportunity to be considered to open a new charter school in partnership with the Vancouver, Washington community. And Vancouver, Washington is not like near Canada. This is like next to Portland. And this, if approved, would be the first charter school in that community's history ever. And it will be a small school, about 125 students at scale, full scale, small, very small high school. But the interesting thing is that, you know, this is happening within a state in a community that has had a reputation for being hostile to charters, if I can put it that way. Yeah, what we seem to be experiencing is that when there is an authentic invitation, and when an outside entity or even a homegrown one sincerely aims to listen to what is needed and build in partnership with that, communities will respond. And I think that the charter model potentially lends itself to some new opportunities where we can potentially provide new proof points. There's not a rooted that exists in Washington State per se, but you know, how might a rooted school in its very small footprint provide an example of a new possibility that can then be realized across a state or across a community that may have just been uncovered previously or covered previously. So no, I see charters as in this opportunity that we all have together as an example to do that.
I will keep you in my prayers, Jonathan, with that expansion. And it sounds good for now. I love that. I'll keep you in my prayers. For everybody watching, for our participants, I should say to you all, this is an open conversation too. So if you have any questions or thoughts or ideas for the guests, please put them into the question and answers section, and we will keep watching that, and we'll pull questions from there as we go along. Rachelle, listen to Jonathan speak about going into different places, and when you have a unique invitation, when you have a real invitation, community invitation, feels like with Prenda, that's kind of like your guys' part of your operating model is the one to have an invitation, and two, to be kind of agnostic about sector or who you work with. Is that working out okay for you?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. We are happy to work with charters. To answer that last question, I think a lot of times charter leaders are more open to new ideas, sometimes than a district. And in a district leadership, there's a superintendent and a board. And, we've had a couple of really small partnerships. We have a really small partnership in a district in Arizona where we have a Prenda micro school inside of a public school that has been a beautiful experience for kids. And for us, we're working on a partnership in Kansas with a district. So yes, we're excited about kind of anybody that wants to work with us. We are happy to work with them and at whatever scale bring this. And then also we've got the beginnings of some philanthropic micro schools in Arkansas. We're just starting 10 micro schools with some philanthropic dollars. So just kind of in different places, giving people an opportunity to experience it, to see it, and then go, oh, this does some really incredible things.
Often when I hear these type of conversations, as a person who's not on the panel himself, but in the audience, I'm thinking, oh, this all sounds so great and lovely and blah, blah, blah. And, I've heard of a lot of different programs that we do in Reform World, and I love lots of them. But I never hear the challenges. I never hear the, if I were to do 24 hours with you and follow you and, got late at night, we were maybe doing the little bourbon or whiskey at the end of the night saying, hey, what was going on today? For those of you that do bourbon or whiskey, what would we talk about if we were at the end of the day and it was like we were being real with each other about some of the challenges of this work?
Well, if we're being real, we wouldn't even be having drinks because we're working, every waking hour of the day, literally, on getting the school launched because the plans were ambitious. Providing an individualized learning plan for each and every student, all brand new students to this system, was very ambitious and it was very taxing on the teachers. Not to mention the overwhelming popularity of the model. It's so high enrollment, teachers that were teaching, many students individually. And so just getting rolling was extremely challenging. The teachers were, thank God they believed in the model and we're doing this for kids because I've never seen a group of individuals work so hard in my life, and those are the challenges because they have to find things that sustain them, and starting to see these children change behaviors and their lives start to change, and even connecting their families with services that they should have been receiving long ago, somehow fell through the cracks. Those are the things that were sustaining our teachers. And luckily, as they got a little bit more of a hang of it, and started creating their processes, things have gotten a little easier. Not by any means easy, but easier. Where some of them may be able to get their weekends back or some of their evenings back. But that was extremely challenging.
I would agree with that. When you have something that's working, especially in this environment, growth is the blessing and curse of the experience. And so, we went from 30 students in 2018 to 450 in 2019 to 3,900 in 2020. And those were our fall numbers. And so keeping up with that growth, making sure we're meeting the needs of students. And then on top of that, at every stage, we have responded to the struggles that have happened for individual micro schools and individual guides. Like every micro school has its own personality, has its own unique character, and then there are things that micro schools have run into that we never even thought we would need to consider. Like they were struggles and problems that weren't on our radar. And so the places where we've had the most challenge has been the best opportunity for us to grow and understand, and then throughout the system kind of spread that learning. But there have definitely been classrooms that we've struggled in because we didn't have mechanisms in place to deal with certain student issues or deal with inadequacies in guides. Like we thought, as we focused on learner autonomy, we thought we really emphasized to adults, like to grant that autonomy, not realizing that some adults would then grant too much autonomy and would grant not just academic autonomy, but autonomy in the space, which turns into anarchy. So just like understanding, our problems have taught us a lot, and we've had all kinds of things to learn in this process.
Yeah, I think that's really important though, because often when school leaders or folks like yourselves talk about your schools, it sounds like your concept paper. Oftentimes is what people hear, but the real learning of charter schools happens in the day-to-day. And that's where the real magic is. So if people can glean anything from you, it's probably in the real. It's probably in the day-to-day than more so than your concept paper. As you were talking, though, I was thinking to myself, too, this might be a little bit different for two of you, at least, and you are building from the bottom up. You have like an organic growth problem or a plan in a way in which it could be kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, that wouldn't require a charismatic leader. Someone could leave and your program could still go on, like because you've planted something. But do you get hit with the question that I think is the kiss of death for a lot of people, which is the scale question? Like, this sounds great. How are we going to scale it, and how fast can we scale it? And then that becomes part of your problem, like the trying to grow something organically. And now how do I explode it, make it bigger? Do you get the scale question?
Yeah, I'll just kind of jump in with that. And by the way, I hope that there will be an Oregon Pinot available for me.
Really?
Yeah. And then two, I'd probably be getting real about my date life. So just those are the first two things that I want to make sure I address. No, I mean, to your point, yes. So that would actually be the thing that we would be talking about is we sort of with, the ambitious nature around some components of our model, there just aren't a lot of blueprints for how you build some of the things that we're attempting to do. And so to be building something as you fly it is not a statement that I have found is very well welcomed in the spaces of people who believe that they know the secret sauce of growing charter schools well, or those people who just think that that's an old model and we should be doing something completely different. And so, different people have strong opinions about that. And I think we're in a place that is a moment in time that is highly visionary and highly creative. And these organizations are not blind to that or experiencing that. And the more I believe that we can embrace the entrepreneurs who have not only great visions, but actually the ability to show that they can rise to that moment and the full extremity of that. I think we would do ourselves a disservice if we didn't do more to cultivate those kind of leaders in the unknown.
Yeah, I agree. And to the scalability question for us, because our schools happen because our micro schools happen in informal spaces, it's kind of like the sky's the limit. Our curriculum is centralized and has a really beautiful tech element to it, like an appropriate amount of tech element to help distribute that to our micro schools. And so really, as soon as we find places, other places in the country to go with a partnership, whether it's a district or a charter, we have that opportunity to kind of move those things quickly because we don't need a building to meet in. And I think for a lot of charters, that's the limiting factor in their numbers and their ability to grow.
I wonder how you all feel about this national narrative around, well, let me change it a little bit. Reform World had a different narrative because now everything is upside down. So all things are possible now. And I'm wondering, I see two paths and I can't decide what path is really going to win. So one path is this has been so bad for so many people that they need like the comfort and the comfort food, the weighted blanket. They need, they need in Minnesota, we need more hot dish, which is our national dish here, our statewide dish here, and whatever. You need comfort food at a time like this and the idea that you will go back to normal. Right, is what I think is one path. The other path is it's all upside down right now. It's up for grabs. People are going to see that there are many ways that learning can take place and it can happen. Where are you guys, if you had to be a little bit of a Nostradamus on this and based on your experience, what are you betting on in terms of families wanting to go back to comfort or wanting to see where this thing goes? Because learning can happen many different ways.
If I can jump in, it's been a little bit of both here in Oklahoma, and it's been very surprising because in the ed reform world, we're exactly usually in the places you were talking about, Chris, earlier, in there's underserved communities, many times in our minority communities, where things have been bad for a long time, and we're trying to find solutions for these problems. However, because of COVID, it's actually exposed some of the fundamental issues with how education is structured for parents that had kind of just taken for granted education for a long time because they were generally content with how it was going. Just to give you an example, we had a number of suburban communities where some of the best school districts, in the state would be considered the best school district in the state, where the districts were making choices without parents involved. Regarding, in-school instruction, virtual instruction, across the board, whether those options are going to be available to them, whether or not. And those parents started learning very quickly, like many of our parents already knew, that it's hard when you don't agree with a district or when you don't agree with something that's going on in the system to make your voice heard. And so, and these are parents running into for the first time. So, it started them, first off, building a sense of urgency to say, hey, this needs to change. How do we hold our district more accountable? How do we change the rules of the game to where parents are more in control? If I'm having these issues, what about other communities? And so they're finally waking up to the fact that these problems have existed for a long time, and that these other communities where maybe they were told that these communities don't value education and they believed it, now are starting to think, well, maybe they do care, but they haven't been able to be heard. So it's completely opened up many new conversations, so much to the point that there are parents statewide now forming a parent union, which I'm sure many of you have seen across the country. So a new statewide organization just launched last week called Parent Voice Oklahoma, made up of a diverse range of parents in all sorts of different education environments, all kind of under that umbrella of let's change the rules to put parents back in the power of the education of their children. So
that sounds very important because you say the families are waking up, and in the vernacular of the day, I'm wondering if they're going to stay woke, right? Like when this thing, like when it's possible to go back to just the way things were. But I love where you landed at, though. There's infrastructure being built to keep those parents together, a statewide organization that kind of helps them keep their voice going. Now I feel better about the fact that they're going to, stay awake about what they've awoken to. You did mention that you're in Oklahoma. I know that there's organizations in Oklahoma and in Texas and a few other places, and definitely growing in New Orleans, where they're very sour on charter schools. Their efforts are growing. Their ability to work with journalists, clergy, and others against charter schools is actually growing. Jonathan, you're brave in going to Washington State, where I can't think of a place that's a tougher market, where it's just in the DNA of journalism and the social climate to be anti-charter. How's that affecting the work that you want to do right now? Is it status quo of the way that it always had been before, or are districts starting to see that maybe you're a little bit more of a threat than they thought that you were?
Chris, unless we are not seeing the barrage of hell that we could potentially catch. Our experience has just been radically different, and I think it really comes down to our why. When communities understand the why and feel that why authentically, meeting a need in the present moment, I find it just easier to build momentum and partnership that way. And so an example of that, in terms of a why that has come up in our process, and this is something I've only uncovered in my work with Indianapolis and Vancouver, is that my why and the why for Rooted's work really stems to an experience I had when I was in third grade, and coming home to my mother crying because her and my father were going to have to give up the childhood home I grew up in because our neighborhood was gentrifying and they could no longer afford the rising fees. Yeah. And I remember the anger that I felt from that. And then later, letting that anger become a seed of an idea that, what could I do with my life so that other young people don't have to lose their home like I did? Mm-hmm. And so this quest of helping young people build a better life than what came before them, a better life than what their parents may have been able to give them, and that being authentically connected to my why, my story, and that we have a plan that we think can help us deliver on that, has just enabled us to sort of build more graciously than what I would say a lot of peers of mine have.
So people get what you're trying to do from the beginning. I mean, that's a big part of your success, is that they get it. They understand it, who you're trying to help and why you're trying to help them.
And we try to live consistently in the values that founded our organization to get there.
I'm still going to keep you in my prayers, Jonathan.
Yeah, I need it. Yeah.
I just want you to know you're still Rachelle or Robert. I mean, same thing. The resistance. There's always going to be resistance, but how's it now? What's it like now for you?
So where we are, we're fortunate enough to partner with an existing charter school network to launch our program. So we didn't launch a different school, and it was like Rachelle was saying, is that the scalability is really great because we are not limited to a physical location either, even though we do have physical facilities for wraparound services and after school activities that are important to our model. The system that we partnered with grew from 30,000 students to 60,000 students during the course of the summer, basically. Become
say those numbers again.
30,000 to 60,000 over 4-month period.
Yeah.
And this was unheard of. This school system, which is called Epic Charter Schools, is now the largest school district in Oklahoma. And obviously parents made this choice because, especially in light of COVID and needing to be safe, they wanted to have their child in a school that had a proven track record for virtual education. They've been doing this for 10 years, whereas many of these districts were going to go into this foray for the first time, and really without any real plan. And they've disrupted the system so much that the enemies are across the board. The opposition is across the board. Whether you're talking about trying to launch investigations, trying to change laws. They have something very popular with parents that is called the Learning Fund. They actually allocate $1,000 of the students per pupil to a learning fund that's in the control of the parents for tutoring, for equipment, for curriculum, for all sorts of things, after school activities. And they're trying to shut that down for really no other reason than to not have an incentive for parents to join the school system.
Wait, who's trying to shut that down?
The State Department of Education.
Wow. So wait a second, let me get this right. So there's a portion of your per pupil income that's in control of the family. The family gets to determine how that's used.
Exactly.
And there's a group that doesn't want that to happen.
Yes, because basically the other school districts don't do that. They don't want to have this school district have a leg up, basically a marketing feature is what they call it. So it's ridiculous. I mean, it's a parent's dream come true, especially parents that don't have the resources. When you look at the south side of Oklahoma City, where the majority Hispanic, there are almost no after school programs available in those spaces because the families just don't have the resources to put their kids in those programs. For the first time, our kids are able to get into mariachi programs, ballet folklorico programs, photography, art, because now they have a vehicle to pay for that, and so because that exists, the supply end is opening to meet those new demands, where nothing was available before, and that's nothing but a positive thing. But no, that is definitely under attack. So yeah, it's just interesting to see the lengths that the opposition will go to. It's interesting to also see the kind of language and rhetoric that's already been developed that somehow resonates, even though when you look at the base of it, it really doesn't make any sense. So that is challenging. It is hard to, especially when you're part of a system that is so disruptive, that's really changing the way education looks like in the state. And so, and the ones that end up losing, of course, are the students and the parents, and so that's the hard thing to deal with.
I mean, this feels like, really for charter leaders having the box with two hands. Like, one hand you're pushing forward with the creative idea, but with the other hand, you're like having to deal with the resistance or the people who are kind of retrograde, like want to go backwards. I mean, putting a portion of their per pupil into the hands of parents for them to be able to decide, this is a kind of a bewildering thing for me. Like, how's that a bad idea? Making sure that students actually are being compensated for some of the work we do. Let's just be real. Like, students are child workers in some of the education system. They really are. They're actually producing for a class of middle class people that lord over them and earn entire livings off of them not learning. But as long as their head count stays there, as long as you keep the head count in place and keep them there, they're producing something for somebody, and that's the reason to keep them there. So the idea that you would help them learn how to have a little money in their pocket and how to capitalize themselves seems like a no-brainer. How we would do that for parents, because we want involvement, seems like a no-brainer. And then Rachelle, having parents at every level of the decision-making process about what school's going to look like or learning, all of these things seem like no-brainers to me, but what do I know? I'm just a talking head guy. They seem like no-brainers to me. We are talking about the next generation of charter schools, though. We're talking about breaking new ground, solving real problems, not being the stereotype of what charter schools have become all too often, to be real. How are you guys going to sustain that level of creativity, though, that level of forward thinking, and just keep pushing on forward and not go retro?
I'd love to jump in on that. Jonathan, I didn't mean to interrupt you. We, at Prenda, we talk about, we've just gotten started. Like, there's the group of us that kind of are in the works of making Prenda what it is. There's so much that we can do for kids. There's so many ways that we can make things better. I mean, I love some of the work Jonathan's doing. I've had, you know, as we develop our middle school, so we're K-8, so as we develop our middle school, you know, one of my dreams of down the road is entrepreneurial, you know, work for our middle schoolers, microloans for our middle schoolers. There's so many, like, that's the beauty, is that there's nothing to keep us from iterating and making it better and better for kids. And again, we learn the most when we don't do it right. And so watching, like, where are we not doing it right, and what can we learn from that, and how can we then benefit thousands and ultimately tens of thousands of kids in that process. I'm so excited about what we see as we, like, bring all of our system together and we actually get to start just making it really cool. That's the exciting part to me.
And Jonathan, I think you were going to jump in there.
Yeah. I think one exciting benefit of charter schools, or the future of them, is that because we're nonprofit entities, we have our boards, right? And as a result of that, can build 20 years, you know, from now. And I think that's a vastly underutilized opportunity that we all have, is to build many decades into the future. I think it just starts with dreaming more. I remember when I first got started, I was working with a charter leader who was coaching me around mission and vision, and literally asked me to write 5 minutes about, like, if you actually achieved the dream, like, what would be different? And like, write for 5 minutes. And ever since that conversation, a lot of what has happened is like the next step in a direction towards that day, whatever that day is. And I would love to just see more organizations shoot for that.
Yeah, that's so important. You know, that's where our conversations start off with parents, is that in an ideal world, what would education look like for your kids? If this were to happen, what would the world look like? And then, you know, trying to, and sometimes contrasting that with what is the reality of what is there now. And I think this model, you know, community organizing is not a new model. It's a model that has been around for a long time, has created a lot of positive change in our communities. But when you marry this community organizing model with the democratization of education that has come in the form of charter schools, then you can start really having some different kinds of conversations. And if you don't forget that that's the root of where the design of the school came from, you can always go back, or not even go back, but make sure that that's integrated into the DNA of the school, that the leadership comes from the community and not from an individual school leader. Chris, what you were saying earlier is that, yeah, I mean, I could go away tomorrow because really I'm not a school leader in that that traditional sense of the word. The decisions are being made by parents, and by this entity that has been made up of basically volunteer leaders, volunteer school leaders. And so I think that will help, you know, continue to drive the innovation, continue to drive these great ideas. Parents know what their kids need. They many times have very creative solutions for getting there. Things that we would never be able to come up with in 1,000 years on our own. And so as long as we trust in the process, build the capacity of parents to lead, of communities to lead, I think that we can continue to innovate for years and years to come.
That feels like a huge part of when you say build capacity of parents. I mean, a lot of parents, you know, we exist in a lot of different places. Some of us, it's enough for us just to get our kid to school, you know, and get them there and have you do your magic. And for others, we got a little bit more time. And then some of us got a lot of time, right, on our hands. And unfortunately, those different levels of parents have very different politics sometimes. But I'm noticing that Tilly Elverum put into the chat, Tilly's just a fierce champion for parental kind of power, like the power of the parent to determine things. And she says that, you know, parents need to be fierce advocates as new learning models develop. because nothing is guaranteed. And she's talking a little bit about the institution, the existing institution will come for you. How are you guys thinking about parents being the ones, though, that lead the charge, when it not just day to day, but when it does come time for someone to need to stand up and to be the fierce advocates? That's a different kind of parent, and you have to kind of produce them. You have to work with them over time. How's that happen?
Chris, this is a really great question, because it's what I've been thinking about as I've developed our new markets team to expand outside of Arizona. I thought about the roles that we needed. Parent engagement is one of them, and we didn't do this in Arizona, and I see the value and the need for it, because when you talk about resistance, one of the places that resist us is traditional teachers unions, because we see a passionate adult as a valid educator inside of our micro schools. And so one of the things that we've talked about is, once a parent comes into Prenda, there's two things that we want them to be able to do. We want them to talk powerfully about their experience in Prenda, and we want them to be very aware of their power as a political advocate. What district are you in? Who is your legislator? How can you communicate to that legislator that your child's in a micro school, and that micro school, and invite that, obviously COVID makes it a little bit, but invite the legislator into the micro school, take the micro school kids to the legislator, and just having that be a part of the DNA of being a Prenda parent is, if you love this, you're going to have to help us protect it, because there are there are powers that aren't excited about it, and we want our kids to be able to continue to have this. I think about, we're 2 years into our existence, and I think about, what is a kid who came in kindergarten and didn't have the armor that they had to put on because of these negative experiences in their education, 5 years into a very empowering environment? What does a fifth grader who started in kindergarten in Prenda look like? And we don't know yet, but we're really excited to sort of see what that is.
Chris, you were saying that parents are all over the place, and it's kind of one of the principles that we use in organizing, is that take people where they are, but then don't leave them there. A big part of our work is just convincing parents that they have power, because we believe that every parent has innate power, that we don't do anything to empower parents. They have it already. It's just sometimes having to convince them that they have it, and then how to exercise it, how to build relationships with one another to make these efforts sustainable. Because once they can really start building those relationships with each other, it makes engaging in many of these really fierce battles easier, because now you're doing it together. It's not just you alone against the world, which it can feel that way a lot of times. I think many times as ed reformers, sometimes we're the only ones in the space. But if you can get a group of parents together that are building these relationships that then help to build the capacity of other parents, that becomes extremely powerful. And then you just have to get out of the way.
And especially if it's a group of parents that has been disenfranchised historically and hasn't had the opportunity or feel like they had a voice. There's a lot of parents in this country that have no idea that they have a voice in any of this.
Yeah, I've probably in 12 or 13 years, I've visited thousands of schools. I've done the school walk. I've been a school board member. I know what it is to show up unannounced to school, and so that you get to see what really goes down. It amazes me at different socioeconomic levels. There's a point at which the parents that are giving you the tour of the school are the experts, and the principal's in his office. He's not the one to give you the tour. And these are some more of the upscale schools that I've visited, and I've thought, wow, this guy's got a really easy job, because he's got parents that have taken it to the next level. Right. And if anybody came for their school, he doesn't even have to be the main one that has to jump out forward, because they've got phone trees. And, I laugh because they have boxed wine and phone trees, and, they can sit around and figure out how they're going to make things happen. Jonathan, parents, we make a lot of their power, and it's important. But I think actually once we get that job accomplished, the very next thing we're going to ask after that is, what about student power? What about students being able to speak for themselves? You talked about your first class that are graduating, your first cohort or whatnot. who do you see in that group, not by name, but just, I mean, what are you seeing in terms of leadership of some of those students saying, I get it. I get why this was really important, and I want to be more of an advocate for it?
Thank you for that question, Chris. A student that I can think of who embodies that for me is a young woman, actually, who was not a founding student of ours. And so she joined us this year, and this will be her first year with us, and she's also graduating. And so doesn't know like the full story, didn't get all of that. And yet, when confronted with the choice of going to a four-year college, which she totally has the ability to do, but she would be the first person in her family to potentially graduate from college, or come out of high school and go get paid, maybe $40K, almost what her teachers get paid, no debt, and make a choice to do that instead of this other path that is well beaten, a lot more of a brand cachet around it, arguably a greater insurance on a financially successful future for her, yet chooses to take this leap. And that is what inspires me about young people like this, who are leading in a moment and choosing to lead in a moment and make choices that, as many adults think are difficult, right? And like, oh my God, you're like ruining your life. And it's like, no, I'm just gonna do this, and I don't really know what the future holds, but it does seems like I could bounce back from this. I would love to see more of that.
As we get closer to wrapping, and I would love to hear some final thoughts from you all on this. It is a good moment to be deeply interested in what the next wave of charter schools do, because what we have done previously, it was great. It was a great start in '92. It's been a great 25 years. There has been some advancements in some places, but we've learned a lot. And it almost feels like, it got to the point of which it was time for a renaissance, for a new set of schools. That's why it's really interesting looking at the three of you right now, taking such novel approaches and different approaches. It forecasts what can be, and for the next group of leaders. I'd love to hear from you in closing, what makes you hopeful and optimistic that this next wave, that we will be able to break things down and be real kind of problem solvers that solve real problems in real communities with real people. Now, people always hate to go first or last or whatever, so I'm going to pick at random. Jonathan, I'd start with you. Just, what keeps you optimistic that the next generation of chartering and charter schools is going to really do real things for communities?
What keeps me optimistic, other than the stories that I've shared just from our own slice of the world, is that it's very clear that schools are a potential beacon for social change within communities. That is something that has become increasingly clear, or made clear, by this pandemic, as stories surface every day about the role that schools are playing in the next phase of whatever life brings. And so with that, we have an urgent mandate to leverage the assets, the community assets that we have at our disposal, towards the biggest challenges that face us. And we happen to be a team that is fascinated by the fact that unless something changes, it would take 28 years for the average Black family to obtain the same amount of wealth as the average white family in this country. And there's just a role that we believe schools can play in laying the groundwork to close that. And there are many, many other big problems like that. But schools have an opportunity unlike any other to tackle them.
Awesome. Rachelle, quick couple of sentences.
I think when I talk to people, I talk to anybody and they get excited about what we're doing. Like that's the piece that gives me hope, because they get it. Like they see it and they're like, oh, this is it.
Robert?
What makes me most hopeful, I think, is the fact that parents are waking up and the parents are realizing that they have power. Like I said, once they realize that and they start exercising that power, it's like, just get out of their way, because they're going to do a lot of great things. They're going to do a lot of great things in our communities, and they're going to do a lot of great things in this country. So I look forward to seeing that.
Amazing. This has been a great hour. I appreciate you all for bringing your optimism and your novel ideas and kind of the promise and the hope that you bring with you. This was the original promise of charter schools. The original promise was that we would do things differently with communities, with teachers, with educators, with students, to create new possibilities that didn't exist already. And for the next wave, the unbundled generation of charter schools, it makes a lot of sense that you all would return to that promise again, because we still need families and students to find their way into the American economic mainstream. We still need students and families to get the skills and get the things that they need while they're in school that help them succeed in life, in career, college, whatever it is that they attempt to do. And we're not going to do it at the same level of thinking that we've been at for the last 10, 15, 20, 150 years in public education. So thank you all. This has been a great panel with Jonathan Johnson, who is the founder and CEO of Rooted Schools, with Robert Ruiz, who is the executive director of Choice Matters, and with Rachelle Gibson, who is enrollment director for Prenda. And I'm Chris Stewart. This has been a great hour. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.